I was on my hands and knees scrubbing the toilet bowl with my bare hands because my daughter had hidden all the cleaning supplies when I heard her on the phone telling her friend, "Mom's finally learning her place. She'll do anything to keep living here." That's when I realized the woman I'd raised, supported through college, and given everything to had turned me into her personal servant in my own home. The cold porcelain against my knuckles felt like a slap of reality that echoed through every bone in my arthritic hands. Here I was, 68 years old, reduced to cleaning my daughter's bathroom with nothing but my bare skin and the bitter taste of humiliation coating my tongue like copper pennies. The ammonia smell burned my nostrils, mixing with the scent of my own tears that I hadn't even realized were falling. But none of that physical discomfort compared to the searing pain of understanding that this wasn't rock bottom. This was just Tuesday in the life that my only child had constructed for me. The bathroom tiles pressed cold patterns into my knees through my worn cotton pants, the same pants I'd been wearing for 3 days because Dawn had declared that laundry was only done on Sundays now, and only if I'd completed all my other chores to her satisfaction. The toilet water was cold against my hands, and I could feel my wedding ring, Frank's grandmother's ring that I'd worn for 45 years, clicking against the porcelain as I scrubbed. The sound was hollow, empty, like the echo of everything my life had become since my husband died and my daughter moved back home. I should back up and explain how I got here, how a woman who once managed a team of 12 at the county clerk's office, who balanced budgets and supervised elections and commanded respect from lawyers and judges alike, ended up scrubbing toilets with her bare hands in her own house while her daughter discussed her degradation like it was entertainment for her friends. The journey from dignity to desperation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone, so gradual that I didn't notice the damage until the foundation of my life had crumbled completely. It started, like most disasters do, with love and the best of intentions. When my husband Frank died 3 years ago, I thought I knew what grief looked like. I'd lost my parents, my sister, friends over the years. But losing the man you've shared a bed with for 45 years, the person who knew your coffee preference and your deepest fears, who remembered your anniversary and could finish your sentences, that's a different kind of dying. It's like having half your soul surgically removed while you're still expected to function as a whole person. The house we'd built together, a modest 3-bedroom ranch on 2 acres outside Millfield, suddenly felt enormous and suffocating at the same time. Every room held memories of Frank. The kitchen where he'd made me pancakes every Sunday morning for 4 decades, the living room where we'd watched our daughter take her first steps, the bedroom where we'd whispered our dreams and fears in the darkness, the garage where he'd spent countless weekend hours restoring the 1967 Mustang that still sat under a tarp, waiting for hands that would never touch it again. I wandered through those rooms like a ghost haunting her own life, making coffee for one and talking to the television like it might answer back with Frank's voice. The silence was overwhelming, not just the absence of sound, but the absence of purpose. For 45 years, I'd been half of a partnership. Now I was just Eleanor, and I wasn't entirely sure who that was anymore. That's when Dawn appeared like an answer to prayer. My daughter had always been beautiful, dark hair like her father's, green eyes that could melt your heart or freeze your blood depending on her mood. At 34, she'd inherited Frank's charm and my determination, but somehow those qualities had twisted into something I didn't recognize. She worked at an insurance office downtown, had her own apartment, seemed to be building an independent life. When she showed up at my door 3 days after Frank's funeral with tears in her eyes and concern in her voice, I felt like maybe God hadn't abandoned me completely. "Mom, you can't live alone in this big house," she'd said, settling onto the couch next to me and taking my hands in hers. Her voice had that syrupy quality I now recognize as manipulation, but at the time it sounded like salvation. What if something happens? What if you fall and no one finds you for days? What if you forget to lock the doors or leave the stove on? "I've been lying awake at night worrying about you." I remember protesting, telling her I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself, that I'd been managing just fine before Frank died, and could continue doing so afterward. But Dawn had this way of looking at you, this combination of pity and patience that made you feel ancient and addled, like a child who didn't understand the complexity of adult decisions. "I know you think you're fine, Mom," she'd said, squeezing my hands just a little too tight. "But grief does things to people. It makes them forget things, makes them confused. You need family around you right now. I'm moving back home to take care of you, and Derek's coming with me. We'll be your support system." Derek. I should have known right then that something was wrong, should have trusted the instinct that made my stomach clench when she mentioned his name. Derek Patterson was Dawn's boyfriend of 8 months, a 28-year-old man-child who'd never held a job longer than 6 months and seemed to view personal responsibility as a suggestion rather than a requirement. He had the kind of charm that worked on checkout girls and bartenders, all smooth smiles and easy compliments. But I'd seen through it from the moment Dawn introduced him. Frank had seen through it too. "That boy's trouble, Eleanor," he'd said after Derek's first visit to our house. "He's got the look of someone who's always working an angle, always looking for the easy way out. Dawn can do better." But Frank was gone now, and Dawn was grieving too, and maybe Derek provided her with comfort I couldn't give her. So when she said he'd be moving in with her, I swallowed my objections and told myself it was temporary. They were saving money for their own place. I was helping family. That's what mothers do. We sacrifice our comfort for our children's happiness, even when those children are grown adults who should be capable of managing their own lives. The first few weeks were almost pleasant. Dawn cooked dinner most nights, and we'd sit around the kitchen table like a family, sharing stories about Frank and talking about the future. Derek was on his best behavior, helping with dishes and yard work, asking polite questions about my career and Frank's military service. It felt like maybe this arrangement could work, like maybe having them there would help ease the crushing loneliness that had become my constant companion. But slowly, incrementally, things began to change. It started with small suggestions that seemed reasonable on the surface. Dawn thought maybe I should let her handle the bills. All those statements and due dates must be so overwhelming for someone dealing with grief. She offered to take over the grocery shopping since she was already going to the store for her and Derek's needs. She suggested I might want to stay in my bedroom more often, give the young couple some privacy in the main living areas. Each suggestion came wrapped in concern for my well-being, presented as a way to reduce my stress and make my life easier. And maybe, in my grief-clouded state, I was looking for someone to take care of the details, to make the decisions that felt too overwhelming to handle alone. So I said yes to the bills, yes to the shopping, yes to gradually retreating into smaller and smaller spaces in my own home. The financial takeover happened so gradually that I barely noticed it. First, Dawn offered to help me understand the insurance paperwork after Frank's death. Then she suggested we consolidate my accounts to make them easier to manage. Before I knew it, she had power of attorney over my finances, access to all my accounts, control over every dollar Frank and I had saved over a lifetime of careful living. "Don't worry about money anymore, Mom," she'd said, filing away the last of the paperwork that gave her complete control over my financial life. "I'll handle everything. You just focus on healing." The rules started small too. Derek worked from home, which was Dawn's generous description of his daily routine of playing video games and researching cryptocurrency, so I needed to keep my television volume low during his business hours. He had a sensitive stomach, so I couldn't cook anything with strong smells. He was a light sleeper, so I needed to be careful about noise in the evening. Gradually, room by room, I was pushed into smaller and smaller spaces. The living room became Derek's office. The kitchen became Dawn's domain, off limits during her meal preparation times. The garage became Derek's workshop, though I never saw evidence of any actual work being done there. My world shrunk to my bedroom and the small den off the kitchen, and even those spaces weren't entirely mine. The cleaning requirements started about 6 months after they moved in. At first, Dawn framed it as teamwork, as a way for all of us to contribute to maintaining the household. "We're all living here together, Mom," she'd said with that patient smile that made me feel like a burden. "We should all do our part." But somehow Derek's part was existing and pursuing his mysterious business opportunities. Dawn's part was managing the household and taking care of my needs, and my part was doing everything else: vacuuming, mopping, dishes, laundry, bathrooms, windows, dusting, organizing. Every surface in the house became my responsibility. Every mess became mine to clean up. When I protested the workload, pointing out that I was nearly 70 years old and maybe shouldn't be expected to maintain a 3-bedroom house entirely by myself, Dawn's expression would shift. The fake sweetness would melt away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "I thought you'd want to contribute, Mom," she'd say, her voice taking on that hurt tone she'd perfected as a teenager. "I thought you'd want to earn your keep. Derek and I have given up our independence to move in here and take care of you. The least you could do is help maintain the house we're all living in." Then came the threat that became her go-to weapon whenever I showed any sign of resistance. "Of course, if this arrangement isn't working for you, we could always look into other options. There are some very nice assisted living facilities in town. I'm sure they'd love to have a new resident." The threat was delivered sweetly, with a smile that never reached her eyes, but the message was clear: comply with her demands or lose your home. Accept any treatment she chose to dish out, or be shipped off to some institutional facility where I'd spend my remaining years as a number on a chart rather than a person with dignity and rights. The fear that threat instilled in me was overwhelming. This house wasn't just my home. It was 45 years of marriage, a lifetime of memories, the place where Frank and I had planned to grow old together. The thought of losing it, of being forced into some sterile facility where strangers would control every aspect of my life, was more terrifying than any amount of housework or humiliation. So I complied. I cleaned and cooked and did laundry and kept my mouth shut, while Derek lounged in my living room and Dawn spent my money on things Frank and I would never have dreamed of buying. I watched my savings account dwindle as Dawn explained that the cost of groceries and utilities had gone up, that Derek's business ventures required a startup capital, that maintaining an older house was more expensive than I realized. The psychological warfare was constant and subtle. Comments about my memory, suggestions that I was becoming confused or forgetful, observations about my physical limitations, recommendations that I slow down and let younger, more capable people handle important decisions. A steady drip of undermining, disguised as concern, designed to make me doubt my own competence and accept their control as necessary protection. They isolated me from my friends, claiming that visitors were too stressful for Derek's work routine or too overwhelming for my fragile emotional state. They controlled my access to transportation, keeping the car keys and offering to drive me places only when absolutely necessary. They monitored my phone calls and mail, always with plausible explanations about protecting me from scammers or helping me avoid unnecessary stress. Month by month, my world grew smaller and my sense of self grew weaker. The woman who had once supervised elections and managed budgets and commanded respect from elected officials became someone who asked permission to watch television in her own living room and apologized for existing in her own home. The bathroom incident was the culmination of 18 months of systematic abuse, the moment when Dawn's cruelty finally revealed itself completely. It started with her claiming that I'd been doing a poor job cleaning the bathrooms, that guests had complained about the state of the facilities, that Derek's business contacts were forming negative impressions of our household management. "I'm going to have to supervise your cleaning more closely," she'd announced over breakfast, speaking to me like I was a misbehaving child rather than the woman who had birthed and raised her. "And since you clearly can't be trusted with cleaning supplies, I'm going to control access to them. You'll ask me for what you need, use only what I give you, and return everything when you're finished." The next morning, when I went to clean the guest bathroom that Derek was expecting his business contact to use, every cleaning supply in the house had vanished. The toilet brushes, the rubber gloves, the cleaners and disinfectants, everything I needed to do the job properly had been hidden away. "I can't find any cleaning supplies," I told Dawn, feeling like a tenant asking permission from a landlord rather than a homeowner in her own house. She looked up from her phone with that expression of mild annoyance she'd perfected over the past months. "I put them somewhere safe. You'll have to make do with what you have." "Dawn, I need proper supplies to clean a bathroom. I can't do it properly without—" "You can and you will," she interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "That bathroom needs to be spotless before Derek's contact arrives at 2 o'clock. He's coming to discuss a major business opportunity, and I won't have our household looking unprofessional because you can't figure out how to clean a toilet." I stood there in the kitchen, feeling every one of my 68 years pressing down on my shoulders like lead weights. My arthritic hands ached just thinking about scrubbing surfaces without proper tools, and the thought of handling toilet water with my bare skin made my stomach turn. "Dawn, please. I can't clean a toilet with my bare hands. It's unsanitary. It's degrading." Her eyes flashed with something I'd never seen before, something cold and cruel that made me take a step backward. "You can and you will, or you can pack your bags and be out of here by tonight. Your choice, Mom." The word Mom dripped with contempt, delivered like an insult rather than a term of endearment. In that moment, looking at my daughter's face twisted with malice, I saw clearly what I'd been refusing to acknowledge for months. This wasn't about taking care of me or helping me through grief. This was about power, about control, about systematically breaking me down until I was nothing but an unpaid servant in my own home. But the fear of losing my house, of being thrown out with nowhere to go, was still stronger than my outrage. So I went to that bathroom and got down on my hands and knees and began scrubbing that toilet bowl with my bare hands, while Dawn's laughter echoed from the kitchen. The porcelain was cold and unforgiving against my knuckles. The toilet water soaked through my pants at the knees, leaving damp patches that felt like badges of shame. My wedding ring clinked against the bowl with each scrubbing motion, and I found myself thinking about Frank, about what he would say if he could see his wife reduced to this level of humiliation by the daughter they'd both loved and sacrificed for. That's when I heard Dawn's voice from the kitchen, talking on the phone with one of her friends, her tone bright and amused like she was sharing entertaining gossip. "Oh my God, you should see her," Dawn was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the thin walls of our ranch house. "She's actually doing it. Mom's in there scrubbing the toilet with her bare hands because I hid all the cleaning supplies. She's finally learning her place. She'll do anything to keep living here. It's honestly kind of pathetic, but at least she's being useful for once." The laughter that followed those words hit me like a physical blow. My daughter, the child I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through countless illnesses, supported through college, loved unconditionally for 34 years, was discussing my humiliation like it was entertainment, sharing my degradation with her friends like it was a funny story about training a stubborn pet. In that moment, kneeling on the cold bathroom floor, with toilet water dripping from my hands, something fundamental shifted inside me. The fear that had been keeping me compliant, that terror of being alone and helpless, suddenly evaporated like morning fog burned away by sunlight. In its place came something harder, cleaner, more powerful than any emotion I'd felt since Frank died. Clarity, pure, crystalline clarity about exactly what was happening to me and exactly what I needed to do about it. I finished cleaning that toilet with my bare hands, scrubbing until it gleamed like new porcelain, but it was the last degrading thing I would ever do for my daughter. As I washed my hands afterward, scrubbing them raw with dish soap until my skin was red and burning, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the pathetic victim Dawn thought she'd created. She was someone who'd raised a child through sleepless nights and teenage rebellion, someone who'd built a successful career in a male-dominated field, earning respect through competence and integrity, someone who'd maintained a 45-year marriage through good times and bad, who'd survived the death of her life partner and was still standing. She was someone who deserved better than this. The next morning, while Dawn and Derek slept off their late-night gaming session, I dressed carefully in my best Navy pantsuit, the one I'd worn to county commission meetings and court hearings during my working years. I put on my pearl earrings, the ones Frank had given me for our 20th anniversary, and applied my makeup with the precision of someone preparing for battle. Then I walked 3 miles into town, not because I had to, not because Dawn had grudgingly agreed to drive me somewhere, but because I chose to. Every step on that country road was a declaration of independence, a rejection of the helpless invalid role Dawn had cast me in. My feet ached in my good shoes, and my arthritis complained about the uneven pavement, but I felt more like myself than I had in months. I went straight to First National Bank, to the office of Patricia Hendricks, who'd been handling the bank's legal affairs for 20 years. Patricia and I had worked together extensively during my time at the county clerk's office. She'd processed countless documents I'd notarized, handled legal issues for several elections I'd supervised, and over the years our professional relationship had deepened into genuine friendship. "Eleanor," she said, looking surprised to see me as her secretary showed me into her office. "How wonderful to see you. How are you holding up? I heard Dawn moved back home to help take care of things after Frank's passing." Patricia's office was everything I remembered: warm wood paneling, diplomas and certificates covering one wall, family photos on her desk, law books lining the shelves. It smelled like leather and coffee and competence, and sitting in the client chair across from her desk made me feel like myself again for the first time in months. "Patricia," I said, folding my hands in my lap with the composure I'd learned from decades of professional meetings, "I need some legal advice, and I need you to be completely honest with me about my options." Over the next 2 hours, I laid out the entire situation, how Dawn had gradually taken control of my finances under the guise of helping me manage grief-related confusion, how she'd isolated me from friends and activities, claiming it was for my own protection, how she'd turned me into an unpaid servant in my own home, threatening to have me committed to assisted living if I didn't comply with increasingly unreasonable demands. I told her about the hidden cleaning supplies, about being forced to scrub toilets with my bare hands, about overhearing Dawn's phone conversation, where she'd laughed about my humiliation with her friends. I explained how Derek had moved in without paying rent or contributing anything to the household, how they'd taken over every common area in the house, how I'd been pushed into smaller and smaller spaces in my own home. Patricia listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious and more angry with each detail I shared. She took notes in her precise handwriting, asking clarifying questions about dates and specific incidents, building a timeline of abuse that was shocking even to me when laid out chronologically. "Eleanor," she said finally, setting down her pen and looking at me with a mixture of compassion and professional outrage. "What you're describing is a textbook elder abuse. Financial exploitation, psychological manipulation, isolation from support systems, and coercive control. These aren't just moral failures on Dawn's part. They're criminal acts." The words hit me like a revelation. Elder abuse. I'd heard the term before, had even processed cases involving it during my years in the clerk's office, but I'd never applied it to my own situation. In my mind, I was just a mother dealing with a difficult daughter, a grieving widow trying to navigate changed family dynamics. "But I gave her permission," I said, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at me. "I signed the papers giving her access to my accounts. I agreed to let her manage the household. I went along with everything." Patricia leaned forward, her eyes intense with professional certainty. "Consent obtained through manipulation, threats, and psychological pressure isn't real consent, Eleanor. When someone uses your grief and fear to coerce you into signing documents, that's fraud. When they threaten to have you institutionalized if you don't comply with their demands, that's extortion." She pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing. "I need to ask you some specific questions, and I want you to think carefully about your answers. Do you have any independent access to your bank accounts? Any way to verify what Dawn's been doing with your money?" "She handles everything," I admitted, feeling foolish and naive. "She says it's too complicated for me to worry about, that I should focus on healing and let her take care of the financial stress." Patricia's jaw tightened. "That's a classic isolation tactic. Eleanor, I need to be direct with you. Based on what you've told me, I suspect Dawn has been stealing from you. What she's done with your finances alone constitutes felony elder abuse, and if she's been forging your signature or opening accounts in your name, we're looking at identity theft charges as well." The room seemed to spin slightly as the full implications of her words sank in. My daughter, my only child, the person I'd trusted more than anyone else in the world, wasn't just mistreating me. She was robbing me, systematically stealing the money Frank and I had worked 45 years to save. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "How do I prove any of this?" Patricia was already reaching for her phone. "We start by getting you independent access to your financial records. Then we document everything. Every transaction Dawn made without your explicit knowledge. Every account she opened, every dollar she moved without proper authorization. And Eleanor?" She paused, her hand on the phone, her expression fierce with determination. "We're going to get your money back, and we're going to make sure Dawn faces consequences for what she's done to you." The investigation that followed was both enlightening and devastating. With Patricia's help and the bank's cooperation, we began unraveling 18 months of financial manipulation that was far more extensive and calculated than I'd ever imagined. Dawn hadn't just been managing my money, she'd been systematically looting it. In the time since she'd gained access to my accounts, she'd transferred over $60,000 to accounts in her and Derek's names. She'd applied for credit cards using my information, running up debt that I was legally responsible for. She'd taken out a home equity loan against my house, using the money to fund Derek's various business opportunities, which turned out to be nothing more than expensive gaming equipment and cryptocurrency investments. Most shocking of all, we discovered that Dawn had been researching how to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could gain complete power of attorney over all my assets. The browser history on Derek's computer, which Patricia's investigator was able to access through a legal warrant, revealed months of searches about elder care laws, competency hearings, and the fastest ways to liquidate real estate assets. They'd been planning to have me committed to a nursing home, not because I needed care, but because it would give them complete control over my house and remaining savings. According to the documents we found, they'd already contacted several facilities, looking for the cheapest option that would accept Medicaid patients. Their plan was to declare me incompetent, move me into institutional care, sell the house, and keep all the proceeds for themselves. Raised a monster, and that monster had been systematically planning my complete destruction. But Dawn and Derek had made one crucial mistake in all their scheming and financial manipulation. They'd underestimated their victim. They'd assumed they were dealing with a confused, grief-stricken old woman who could be easily manipulated and controlled. They had no idea that the woman they were abusing had spent 30 years working in government, learning exactly how the legal system functioned, building relationships with people who could help her fight back when the time came. Patricia connected me with Janet Morrison, a prosecutor who specialized in elder abuse cases. Janet was a small woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of quiet intensity that made experienced criminals think twice about lying to her. She'd been prosecuting financial crimes for over 20 years, and she reviewed my case with the methodical precision of someone planning a military campaign. "Your daughter and her boyfriend have committed multiple felonies," Janet told me during our first meeting in her office at the courthouse. "Identity theft, financial exploitation of an elderly person, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. Based on the evidence we've gathered, we have enough to put both of them in prison for 10 to 15 years. She spread the documents across her desk: bank statements, credit applications, forged signatures, email communications between Dawn and Derek discussing their plans for my assets. The paper trail of their crimes was overwhelming, and seeing it all laid out in black and white was both vindicating and heartbreaking. But I want to give you control over how this plays out," Janet continued. "We can arrest them immediately and let them know they're facing serious prison time, which might encourage them to plea bargain and return your money. Or we can build an even stronger case, catch them in the act of additional crimes, and ensure they face the maximum possible consequences." The plan we developed was both strategic and satisfying. While Dawn and Derek continued their daily routine of lounging in my house and spending my money, believing they had me completely under their control, I was quietly dismantling their entire scheme and rebuilding my independence. Patricia helped me open new bank accounts at a different institution, accounts that Dawn had no knowledge of and no access to. We transferred my Social Security payments, my pension, and what remained of my savings to these new accounts, effectively cutting off Dawn's access to my income. We changed all my passwords, got new credit cards sent to Patricia's office, and began the process of disputing the fraudulent charges and accounts Dawn had opened in my name. Meanwhile, Janet was building her criminal case. Every fraudulent transaction was being documented and verified. Every forged signature was being analyzed by handwriting experts. Every email and text message between Dawn and Derek was being preserved as evidence of their conspiracy to defraud me. The most satisfying part of the plan was the surveillance. With the court's permission, Janet arranged for recording equipment to be installed in my house, documenting Dawn and Derek's daily routine of verbal abuse and financial discussions. For 2 weeks, everything they said was being recorded. Every threat they made was being preserved. Every casual comment about their plans for my money was being captured for use in court. During those 2 weeks, I played the role of the compliant victim while secretly reclaiming control of my life. I continued cleaning and cooking and following their arbitrary rules, but now every indignity was being documented. Every cruel comment was being recorded. Every instance of abuse was building toward their ultimate downfall. The hardest part was maintaining the facade of helplessness while I felt stronger and more empowered than I had since Frank's death. Every morning, I woke up knowing that Dawn and Derek's time was running out, that justice was coming, that the balance of power in my house was about to shift dramatically and permanently. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after the toilet cleaning incident that had opened my eyes to the full extent of their abuse. I was in the kitchen making breakfast, real breakfast, with bacon and eggs and toast, because it was my kitchen and my food and my choice. When Dawn came stumbling out of the bedroom in yesterday's clothes, looking like something that had been dragged through a hedge backwards. Derek shuffled behind her, unwashed and unkempt, wearing the same gaming headset he'd had on for the past 4 days. They both looked comfortable, entitled, completely confident in their control over me and my house. "Mom," Dawn said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of barely concealed irritation, "I need you to sign some papers today. Banking stuff, nothing too complicated for you to understand." She slid a folder across the kitchen counter, and when I opened it, my blood went cold. It was another power of attorney document, this one even more comprehensive than the ones I'd signed before. This document would give Dawn complete control over my medical decisions as well as my finances. If I signed it, she could have me committed to a nursing home with a single phone call, could make any medical decision she deemed appropriate, could literally control every aspect of my life until the day I died. "I'm not signing this," I said quietly, pushing the folder back across the counter. Dawn's face shifted, that mask of fake concern sliding away to reveal the cold calculation underneath. "Yes, you are. You're going to sign it right now, or Derek and I will pack your bags and drop you off at Shady Oaks this afternoon. See how you like cleaning toilets there when you're paying $2,000 a month for the privilege." Derek stepped forward, trying to look intimidating despite the ridiculous gaming headset still perched on his greasy hair. "Your daughter's been way too patient with you, old lady. Time to face reality about your situation here. I looked at both of them, really looked at them, for what felt like the first time in months. Dawn, the child I'd loved unconditionally for 34 years, who'd turned into someone I barely recognized. Derek, a parasite who'd never contributed anything to anyone, who viewed my home as his personal resort and my money as his inheritance. They both looked so confident, so certain they held all the power, so sure I would cave to their threats like I had every time before. Actually, I said, setting down my coffee cup with steady hands, I think it's time for both of you to face reality. That's when the front door opened and Patricia walked in, followed by Janet Morrison and 2 police officers. The timing was perfect, choreographed down to the minute, and the effect on Dawn and Derek was immediate and dramatic. Dawn's face went white, then red, then white again as the full scope of her situation became clear. Derek actually stumbled backward, his gaming headset falling to the floor with a plastic clatter that somehow made the moment even more satisfying. Dawn Michelle Thompson, Janet said, her voice carrying the weight of legal authority and personal satisfaction, you're under arrest for financial exploitation of an elderly person, identity theft, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. What followed was the most chaotic and gratifying 15 minutes of my life. Dawn started screaming about how ungrateful I was, how she'd sacrificed everything to take care of me, how I was a bitter old woman who didn't deserve her love or her sacrifice. Derek tried to run out of the back door like this was some kind of slapstick comedy, but one of the officers caught him before he made it off the porch. The handcuffs clicking around Dawn's wrists made a sound like justice, like the closing of a chapter in my life that had been written in humiliation and degradation. As the officers read her rights, she looked at me with more pure hatred than I'd ever seen in another human being. "You'll be sorry, Mom," she spat, her voice venomous with rage and disbelief. "You'll die alone in this house and no one will care. No one will even find your body for weeks." But I wasn't sorry. As I watched the police car pull away with my daughter and her boyfriend in the back seat, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: complete, overwhelming peace. The house was quiet again, but it was a good quiet. A clean quiet. The sound of my life belonging to me again. The legal proceedings took months to resolve completely. Dawn eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a longer prison sentence, but she still received 3 years in state prison. Derek got 18 months. More importantly, every dollar they'd stolen was recovered and returned to my accounts, along with substantial damages the court ordered them to pay for the emotional distress they'd caused. The credit cards Dawn had opened fraudulently were closed, and my credit score was restored to its previous excellent rating. The home equity loan was invalidated due to the fraudulent nature of the application, and the money Derek had wasted on his business opportunities was recovered through asset seizure. But the real victory wasn't financial, it was personal. My house was mine again. Every room, every closet, every inch of space belonging to me. I could watch television whenever I wanted, at whatever volume I chose. I could cook whatever smelled good, have friends over without asking permission, use my own bathroom with proper cleaning supplies and complete privacy and dignity. The hardest part of the whole experience wasn't the betrayal or the theft or even the humiliation. The hardest part was grieving the daughter I thought I had, accepting that the child I'd loved and sacrificed for had grown into someone capable of this level of systematic cruelty. But even that grief became manageable over time. I realized that I'd done everything I could as a mother. I'd loved Dawn, supported her through every challenge, given her every advantage I could afford. The choices she made as an adult, the person she chose to become, the crimes she chose to commit, none of that was my failure. That was entirely hers. 6 months after Dawn went to prison, I was sitting in my clean, peaceful living room, drinking coffee from my favorite mug and watching the morning news without anyone's permission when the doorbell rang. It was Patricia, but she wasn't alone. Standing next to her was a distinguished man about my age, tall and silver-haired, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that reminded me a little of Frank. "Eleanor," Patricia said with a grin that told me she'd been planning this introduction for a while. "I'd like you to meet Thomas Garrett. He's been helping me with some legal research, and when I mentioned you might enjoy some company, he insisted on meeting you." Thomas had lost his wife 2 years earlier, and like me, he'd been learning to navigate the strange territory of life alone after decades of partnership. We talked for hours that first day, sitting at my kitchen table, my table in my kitchen, where I could serve whatever I wanted to whomever I chose, discussing books and travel and all the dreams we'd put on hold while we were busy raising families and building careers. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that made me laugh for the first time in months. More importantly, he treated me like the interesting, capable woman I was, not like a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved. When I told him about my years at the county clerk's office, he asked detailed questions about the work, genuinely interested in my experiences and expertise. When I mentioned my love of gardening, he shared stories about his own attempts to grow vegetables, complete with amusing disasters involving overzealous tomato plants and a raccoon with a taste for sweet corn. We've been seeing each other for 8 months now, taking it slow and enjoying each other's company without pressure or expectations. He brings me flowers from his garden, not because I need them or because it's expected, but because he knows I appreciate the gesture and he enjoys making me smile. I cook dinner for him sometimes, elaborate meals that fill the house with wonderful smells, not because I have to, but because I want to, because it's my choice, made freely in my own kitchen, using my own ingredients, for someone who appreciates both the effort and the company. Thomas has his own house, his own life, his own independence, and he respects mine completely. He's never suggested that I need taking care of, never implied that I'm too old or too fragile to make my own decisions. When I told him about what Dawn had done to me, he listened with quiet anger and genuine sympathy, but he never once suggested that I was partially to blame or that I should have seen it coming sooner. Family can be the cruelest, he said simply. They know exactly where to hit to cause the most damage, and they use your love against you like a weapon. You survived something that would have broken a weaker person, Eleanor. You should be proud of your strength, not ashamed of your trust. His words helped heal something in me that I didn't even realize was still wounded. The part that wondered if I'd been foolish to trust my daughter, if I somehow deserved the treatment I received, if my love had been misplaced or naive. Dawn has written me letters from prison, dozens of them over the past months. The early ones were filled with rage and accusations, blaming me for her imprisonment, calling me vindictive and cruel, insisting that she'd only been trying to help me and that I'd misunderstood her intentions. Those letters I threw away without finishing, recognizing them as more of the same manipulation that had controlled me for so long. The more recent letters have taken a different tone. Tearful apologies, claims of regret, promises to be a better daughter if I'll only forgive her and help her get an early release. These are harder to dismiss because they sound more like the Dawn I remember from childhood, the little girl who would cry and apologize after misbehaving, who could melt my heart with a few well-chosen words and genuine-seeming remorse. But I don't respond to any of them. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, that I can release my anger without opening myself up to further abuse. Some bridges, once burned by betrayal this complete, can't be rebuilt. The daughter who forced me to clean toilets with my bare hands while laughing about my humiliation destroyed any possibility of a relationship with the mother who'd sacrificed everything for her. That door is closed now, locked, from my side, and I'm the only one with the key, and I choose to keep it locked. The house feels different now, not just because Dawn and Derek are gone, but because I've reclaimed it completely. I've redecorated the living room, removing every trace of Derek's office and returning it to the comfortable, welcoming space Frank and I had created. I've turned Dawn's old bedroom into a craft room, where I pursue the hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage and my years of caregiving. I quilt and read and listen to music at whatever volume I choose, whenever I choose. I've reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during those dark months, inviting them over for coffee and dinner parties and holiday celebrations. My house is full of laughter again, full of conversation and companionship and the simple pleasure of human connection, freely chosen rather than endured out of obligation or fear. Most importantly, I've learned to trust my own judgment again. The woman who allowed herself to be manipulated and controlled was grieving, vulnerable, desperate for family connection in the aftermath of devastating loss. But that woman was also strong enough to recognize abuse when it became undeniable, smart enough to seek help when she needed it, and brave enough to fight back against people who underestimated her capabilities. I think about that moment often, kneeling on the cold bathroom floor with my hands in toilet water, listening to my daughter laugh about my degradation with her friends. It was the lowest point of my life, the moment when I felt most powerless and humiliated. But it was also the beginning of my resurrection, the catalyst that forced me to see clearly what my life had become and what I needed to do to reclaim it. Because in that moment of complete degradation, I found something I'd lost along the way, my own worth, my own strength, my own absolute unwillingness to accept unacceptable treatment from anyone, even the child I'd loved more than my own life. The woman who rose from her knees in that bathroom was different from the one who'd knelt down. She was someone who knew exactly what she deserved and exactly what she wouldn't tolerate. She was someone who understood that being a mother doesn't mean accepting any treatment your children choose to dish out, that family loyalty has limits, that love without respect is just manipulation with a prettier name. I cleaned out more than Dawn's bank account in the end. I cleaned out the fear that had kept me trapped, the self-doubt that had made me question my own perceptions, the misplaced guilt that had convinced me I deserved poor treatment because I was old, because I was widowed, because I needed help and support. I cleaned out the part of me that believed being dependent on others made me lesser, that asking for respect and dignity made me difficult, that setting boundaries with family members made me unloving. I learned that those things don't diminish your worth. They're evidence of it. Most importantly, I cleaned out the notion that age makes you powerless, that grief makes you weak, that loss makes you less worthy of good treatment. I discovered that I could be vulnerable and strong at the same time, that I could need help without surrendering my autonomy, that I could be alone without being lonely. These days, when people ask me about Dawn, I tell them the truth without sugarcoating it or making excuses. My daughter made choices that led to serious consequences, and now she's dealing with those consequences. I don't pretend that blood relationships excuse cruelty or that family loyalty requires accepting abuse. Some people are uncomfortable with my honesty, preferring the fiction that all family conflicts can be resolved with enough love and patience. But I've learned that some relationships are too damaged to repair, that some people are too toxic to maintain contact with, regardless of their biological connection to you. The house is peaceful now, filled with people who treat me with respect and kindness. I can sit in any room I want, use my bathroom with complete privacy and dignity, make decisions about my own life without consulting anyone or asking permission. I have friends who value my company, a romantic relationship built on mutual respect, and the quiet satisfaction of justice served. When I look back on that day, kneeling on the bathroom floor while my daughter laughed about my humiliation, I feel something I never expected to feel: gratitude. Not for the experience itself, which was horrific and dehumanizing, but for what it taught me about my own resilience and what it forced me to do about my situation. It took hitting that particular rock bottom to realize that I didn't have to stay there, that I had resources and allies and options I'd been too frightened or too manipulated to see. Dawn thought she was teaching me my place, but what she actually taught me was that my place is wherever I choose to stand, with dignity intact and self-respect as my non-negotiable foundation. She thought making me clean toilets with my bare hands would break me completely, would reduce me to a grateful, compliant servant who would accept any treatment rather than risk being abandoned. What it actually did was burn away every illusion I had about who she really was and what I really deserved from the people in my life. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that happens to you, not because the experience itself was good, but because it forces you to discover strength you didn't know you had, to access resources you didn't realize were available, to demand treatment you'd forgotten you deserved. That toilet bowl, that cold porcelain, those bare hands scrubbing in humiliation while my daughter laughed, they became the foundation of my liberation, the moment I stopped being a victim and started being a woman who knew her own worth and was willing to fight for it. The woman who rose from her knees in that bathroom isn't going anywhere. She's home now, in every sense of the word, surrounded by respect and kindness and the deep satisfaction of a life lived on her own terms. She's learned that cleaning toilets with your bare hands is degrading, but cleaning the toxic people out of your life is liberating. And that's a lesson worth every humiliation, every moment of fear, every tear shed in the process of learning it. Because now I know, really know, in my bones and in my heart, that I deserve better than cruelty disguised as care, that I'm worthy of respect regardless of my age or vulnerability, and that the people who truly love you will never use your need for their love as a weapon against you. That knowledge, that certainty, that unshakable foundation of self-worth, that's what I cleaned out of this experience. That's what I kept when I threw away everything else. And that's what will carry me forward for whatever years I have left, knowing that I'll never again allow anyone to convince me that I deserve less than dignity, respect, and genuine love. The house is quiet now, but it's the good kind of quiet, the sound of peace, of autonomy, of a life lived according to my own values and choices. It's the sound of a woman who learned the hardest way possible that she was stronger than she knew, more resourceful than she'd realized, and worthy of so much more than she'd been accepting. It's the sound of home, reclaimed and cherished and protected, filled with the people who see my worth and reflect it back to me every day. And sometimes when the afternoon light falls just right across my clean kitchen table where Thomas and I share coffee and conversation, I can almost hear Frank's voice whispering what he always told me during the difficult times in our marriage. You're tougher than you think you are, Eleanor, and you deserve every good thing this life has to offer. He was right then, and he's right now. And finally, after all these years and all these trials, I believe it too.